Okay. Good evening. We want to welcome our viewers of the Johnson City Government Information Channel on Charter Cable Channel 192 and Comcast Cable Channel 17 to this live telecast of the November 14th, 2017 Johnson City Regional Planning Commission meeting. This meeting will be rebroadcast on Friday, November 17th, 2017 at 12 p.m. noon. So welcome, thank you. Let's go ahead and open our meeting with a call to order and an invocation. Commissioner Cooper.
Let us pray. Dear Lord, thank you for this opportunity to serve your community and the citizens in it. Give us all wisdom and understanding and cooperation to make sure and ensure that we make decisions that are in the best interest, not only for today, but for the foreseeable future. Thank you again for our military that's overseas, protecting the freedom that we all enjoy. Bring them all safely home soon. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Please stand for the pledge. Pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Before we go any further, I wanted to publicly thank Commissioner Benedict for his service. He has recently resigned from our commission, and he has served us well and worked a lot with our Martin Luther King Task Force, and we want to thank him for his work and dedication. So, claps for him. And let's move on with the approval of our evening's agenda. Have any motions to approve or amend the agenda?
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
Second.
And a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Approved. And next for the approval of the minutes from the October 10, 2017 Planning Commission meeting.
So move.
Point of information, there's a spelling error in the name. Lester Latney's name is spelled with 2 A's.
Thank you.
But in the draft minutes, it has an I. So, and I'm sorry, that's a level of minutia that sometimes I latch on.
That's impressive that you paid attention. Yeah. So we have a approval of the minutes motion with the edited change in the name.
Yes.
Okay. And all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. So minutes are approved. So our items on the business tonight include, first, a rezoning of the property located at People Street. This is a rezoning from planned business to planned residential district, RP5.
Good evening.
Thank you. Mr. Manley?
Matthew Manley, Senior Planner, City of Johnson City. So yes, before you have this a rezoning request from Dominion Senior Living. This is for a split zoning request for a PB district, and they would like for this this northwestern portion to be rezoned to RP5, and that would be in order to service an 80-unit independent living community for seniors. This is an image of their concept plan, which shows the location of the building in relation to the parking lot, open space, sidewalks, People Street, and access point off of People Street. All the requirements for a concept plan are included here. Some changes were made by staff as we worked through this. The developers were very easy to work with, and I believe are here tonight. Sean, are you here? Sean is here, and we can ask him some questions if need be. But the main thing that we're looking at is this was zoned for planned business, which is a pretty intense use. But RP5 is also an intense use. However, it is also a good neighbor for the surrounding existing land uses. Right now is mostly medium density and high density uses in this area, and they increase as you move towards the People Street corridor. So this would be in line with the other high to medium density zonings that are out there. Because this particular portion of the site, of that parcel, is adjacent to an R2 neighborhood, the fact that this would go from a business zoning to a residential zoning, I believe is much more favorable in the eyes of those residents there. And there was a neighborhood meeting held yesterday. Everything I've heard and the people I spoke to seem to be, have very positive feelings about this proposed development. And so, Sean, if you want to speak a little bit to what transpired at the neighborhood meeting. While he's coming up, this was a board that he had provided at the neighborhood meeting, which has an illustration of the proposed development, along with some of the materials.
Good evening. My name's Sean Chalmers with Dominion Development Group, and we have a brand called Dominion Senior Living. We did have a neighborhood meeting yesterday, and many of the folks that were there are present here today, and kind of presented what our plan is, talked about what our business would look like, and then really addressed questions that they had. Some of the questions they talked about were with the bordering of the property with Brown Mills, kind of on that lower section there. I don't know if this mouse works here. This section here. And we would basically work within the requirements for buffering there, building a fence, some landscaping, et cetera. There's likely some rock there that we'd have to remove, and we talked about how we'd communicate with the neighborhood on, how we would have to address that, either by, digging or blasting. We would go through all the requirements there, notification. It was brought up about I guess there's a connection with Douglas Drive that they were opposed to, and we're in agreement with that. I guess that was part of, at one time, a long-term plan. We don't feel like it's appropriate for this site or for the benefit of that neighborhood. But it was very beneficial. If there's anything else I didn't cover, I'd be happy to let them speak. But do you have any questions for me?
No. Thank you. Mr. Manley?
Yes, so the staff recommendation is to approve. There was some discussion of some conditions. We believe it's best to leave that alone at this point. So no recommendation for conditions.
Question on the conditions. Is there concern for the finishing out the temporary stub at the end, putting a cul-de-sac there on Douglas? Is there?
Yeah, not, at this stage, I'm not sure that we have enough information to make that recommendation.
Okay, that is more of a site plan question rather than just a
Right.
zoning question.
Right.
Very good.
So that would be appropriately dealt at site plan.
You think so?
There are times when in the review of site plans, city engineer, planning staff can make a requirement and say, we want you to go ahead and curb this. And sometimes an engineer will refuse to do that. You can have, a developer or an engineer contest that recommendation from staff. But if the planning commission, in making this decision today, say we want that to be curbed, then that becomes binding. The developer or the engineer cannot contest that.
The binding concept plan.
Well, yeah, it's a binding condition of this approval, which, thank you.
I have just a question for Mr. Manley. On the, as far as the buffer goes, is there a significant difference between the buffer for the R5 versus the PB, or are they the same buffer?
The landscape plan would apply the same, right? Yeah, so the application of the landscaping standards would be the same.
Okay,
For
thank
either
you.
one.
What additional uses does 5 allow that RP does not, if any?
What additional uses does the RP5?
Allow that?
Increased density is the main one.
Are there others?
From, within the RP districts?
From the PB.
PB districts?
Oh, PB. PB is commercial uses. So the residential aspects is what the difference is.
I think what you're saying is that let me not put words in your mouth, but to rephrase that, RP5 is less intense in usage than a PB could be. A PB could have service stations and other things like that. I think he was curious does the RP5 allow for anything more intense that maybe that you could not have in a PB?
No, I do not believe so. While there are commercial uses that are allowed, they're going to be more neighborhood-oriented, more of a mixed-use type of commercial use. PB would have a higher intensity of potential development that could occur there. RP5 is a high intensity for residential, just due to the number of units per acre that are.
But the RP5 is more restrictive than like a straight R4, is it not? I mean, because they have to turn in a specific site plan and we have to approve it. So we have more control over an RP5 than we do an R4.
Yes,
Okay.
I would agree with that. The less restrictive in some senses, but not in others, in terms of there's more freedom to mix uses and that type of thing. So.
Thanks.
Did that answer your question?
It did. Thank you.
Sir. Any further questions for staff? No? Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Is there anyone here wishing to speak regarding this rezoning request? For, I quit saying for and against because some people say, well, I'm not either one. Okay, seeing, yes, if you'd like to speak,
I live at the very end of Douglas.
please come on up and just give us your name and address so we can all hear you. Thank you very much.
My name is Jill Piercy, and I live at 514 Douglas Drive. I'm that last big triangle, I'm the last big square at the very end. To the left, my property borders the R4, and then, of course, my property hits the corner of this side. I just don't want Douglas to be opened up at all. It's not in.
That's not part of the request before
Well, I
us.
know, but I'm just, like I said, I'm just wanting to overstate that because, if we're going from R2 development, we have certain restrictions that we followed by. And these are totally different than, of course, what is being proposed on the adjoining property. So, like I said, I request that Douglas would always be closed.
Thank you for giving us your opinion. Of course, that's
Yes.
not the question here tonight or is a part
Right.
of this, but I
Right.
think everybody's pretty well aware of the
Yeah.
community concerns with
Well,
that.
I like
So,
to overstate it. So
glad
thank
you're
you.
here. Thank you very much.
Well, and the surest way to keep Douglas closed is to put a building in its way.
That would do it. All right. If they're seeing no further comment, we'll go ahead and close public comment.
But no,
Is there another one?
I see all kinds of people who probably want to talk about
Well,
it.
we're glad to have you over here. We've been around for a long. Got to move quick, sorry.
Not in a quick moving mood tonight, sorry about that. I'm Susan Gosnell. I'm president of the Villas at Browns Mill. And I might state, we are entirely in favor of this. Our biggest concern is the amount of traffic that we are going to have with this 80 units here. And also, we know that there's some more property that's going to be developed down where Kmart is, and we have had increased traffic through Town Acres and through the villas. So we would like to see a traffic light put up within these, a certain distance down there. There is a little area, four-way stop between Avonlea and the villas. And also, we're concerned about a buffer zone. I think I heard him say something about a wooden fence. Not overly fond of wooden fences because wooden fences will deteriorate over time. We would like to see something in the lines of this berm that's going to be, I think we understood that there would be a berm with maybe some greenery, trees, different variety like that.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gosman. Okay, I'm sorry, I thought somebody else was getting up. I was waiting patiently this time.
I just have one comment.
Yes, please.
I'm Maureen Pellico.
Thank you.
We live right along, is there a pointer?
Ms. Pellico, can you give us your address too, just for the record?
384 Villaview Point.
Thank you.
We live, there's some units right along this corridor, right here. And there's some trees along that line right now, but from what I understand with the drawing, they're gonna put a parking lot back there, and in the center, there's gonna be a retention pond. My only concern, and we talked about this, was the side, that particular side there, is if it can be built up, because if there's any water runoff coming down, it's coming right at those units. So I don't know if along that side, like if some of that ledge and that rock is dug up, if there can just be some sort of maybe a 6-foot height or something there, so it just protects those units from any water runoff coming down.
Okay.
So that's just the only concern we have.
Thank you very much. I have
Water.
some questions about that for staff. Thank you very much, Ms. Pellico.
Yeah. Is it okay if I address?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Are you for or against?
I'll say for the record, I'm for this.
Okay.
Regarding the water detention area, the way that this would be designed is that the water would be captured here, and it would drain towards this detention area, and then piped out towards People's Street. So the way that our civil engineer would design it so that the water would not go over here. I know that we had talked about the possibility of a berm here, and what we would like to do is look at the options within the requirements that are already stated, I think, within the landscaping requirements. We'll consider, but there are budget concerns with building a berm. So I believe if we can accomplish the water drainage issue and then address this with some fencing and landscaping, that would be our request at this stage.
Thank you very much.
I've got questions for staff.
I do too. Okay. Any more public comment for us at this point? All right, thank you all for coming. Appreciate you being here. We're going to go ahead and talk to staff and ask some questions and haven't taken in your input into consideration. I'm going to close the public hearing at this point, and we'd like to ask staff to approach Mr. Manley. Can you hop up for us? The nature of our rezoning request, it requires a concept plan, but it's not a binding concept plan at this point. Is that correct?
It is a binding. So
Okay,
if this is approved for this rezoning and they want to make any changes, then they would have to come back before you with a new concept plan that would then have to be approved again.
Okay, so that was one of my concerns.
There were 3 comments from affected neighbors. One's with berms and trees and fences, and the intensity of this use in relation to the adjacent property is sufficient enough to trigger our buffering. What is the minimum standard for our buffering between parcels? So if you forget fencing, let's not get into specific. What is it? 6-foot trees on 6-foot centers, or is it something more rigorous than that?
Do you know that one? It's tough questions off the top of the head here.
Well, you just wait. I've got 2 more.
Okay.
You like to read my notes and then ask questions.
No, I can't read your writing.
The buffer requirement will be, the developer will not be required per our zoning regulations, our landscaping regulations. The developer will not be required to create a buffer between this lot line from this point right up to People's Street.
Correct.
But from this point, extending northward and this way where it borders the R3 district, and at the rear where it borders the R2 district, he will be required to create a buffer. The buffer requirement for both the R2, adjoining the R2 and the R3 are the same. The way the landscaping ordinance of the city is written is there are like different tiers of buffer requirement, type 1, type 2, type 3. 6 feet trees planted 6 feet on center, and sometimes it depends on the type of trees that they choose to use, but they all have to be evergreen. They all have to be evergreen. If they use a fence, then you just have 1 row of tree. But if there is no fence, then 2 rows are required.
So you'd be 6-foot centers, but they'd be alternating.
They'll be
so you end up
alternating.
with 3-foot centers essentially visually.
I don't have the exact numbers, but the way they are designed, the way the ordinance is written, they alternate, and depending on the type of tree that is chosen, it is such that at full growth, I think within 5 years to 6 years, full growth, the leaves, the crown of the trees all have to come together. So the city forester goes through that plan and makes sure that it meets both our requirements and that the species of trees chosen is such that this buffer need will be met within, I think it's 3 to 6 years, full growth.
And then there was a question about the traffic light, and that, of course, is not part of a rezoning request. Can you describe the process the city might use for considering traffic lights or signalization?
And the current road classification of People Street as arterial versus collector.
I think as it is now, let me see. Right now, I think it's a collector's.
It's a collector.
Okay.
Right now, it's a collector street.
Okay.
Right now, it's a collector street, which will permit business or relatively high intensity commercial, but it doesn't meet the kind of Walmart, development in traffic.
And let's be
volume
clear,
on
you're
the
talking about a collector street meets that. This zoning restricts it. This is a residential zone, so we're not talking about high-impact commercial.
high-impact commercial, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the traffic light signalization, what are the criterias that need to be met for that to even be entertained?
I think it's a city street. I will ask engineering to address that, please.
For a traffic light to be legally installed.
As opposed to illegally installed? Because I'd like to know how that would happen.
Let me say this, there are warrants spelled out by state law. There is the P warrant, which is the political warrant. That's where you're going. We have to meet at least.
Started quickly.
We have to meet at least one of 11 warrants, which involves traffic volumes, peak volumes during peak times, traffic accident rates. Any one of those types of things can trigger meeting a warrant. So we have to do the engineering study to see that we have met a warrant. This is a intersection of two city streets, so we don't involve TDOT, which adds another layer of regulation to it. So it would be a local decision only. It would have to be budgeted for. You do your engineering study, you budget for it, you design it, and you install it. That's usually a city commission thing, but it's not out of line for you to learn about these things and pass that information along from here. A traffic signal these days is costing us around $300,000, and that's why we aren't just readily sticking them up everywhere when we see a need.
And then I had one last question related to the comments one of the homeowners made about water runoff. Describe how much water runoff this property could legally allow to flow into the neighboring properties without consequence.
Al?
Sorry.
I keep good people around.
It's always good to delegate.
I recently talked to an attorney about this, and he may hear me say this tonight, and he scolded me a little bit for this, but common law in Tennessee says you can't increase the flow of water from your property to a neighbor above what naturally flows from your property to the neighbor. You can't change the location. If water's flowing from your property to a neighbor at a certain location, you can't move that around and put it in a new spot for the neighbor. So what the city tries to do is work with developments so that they approximate, you can't meet it 100%, but they have to approximate complying with that common law. So that's where detention comes in usually, is trying to control the volume or the velocity of that water. They're talking about what I heard a moment ago, piping it to People Street, and that's appropriate. We installed pipes in People Street when we built it to do that purpose. And we take it down and to the bottom down there, and when we bought right-of-way for building People Street, we bought about 7 acres of that bottom, which had been filled in with large boulders from building the Sheraton at the time. I think it's Holiday Inn now. There are huge sinkholes down there that were covered over with these huge boulders, and water just soaks in there real easily. And we bought all that land to reserve it, keep it from being developed for this water to go to. So that's on the right side as you go in on Avonlea. That's city land. And if they can get their water to People Street and the pipe's there and it makes it to that spot, we're okay.
Okay. Any further questions for staff?
Team.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead and open it up from the commission for discussion and motions. Just from the traffic standpoint, I remember when we had looked at a rezoning here once before for a similar the planned use facility. I think the traffic impact was expected to be maybe less for a memory center or a center like this than it would be for a typical 80 resident complex because they're not out driving a lot. It's an interesting thought.
Kind of a sad thought.
Yeah.
Well, I would make a motion that the petition be approved with one contingency, and that would be a permanent cul-de-sac be installed as a part of this project at the end of Douglas Drive. So that would be my motion.
We have a motion for, as stated, for it to be approved with a cul-de-sac in place at the end of Douglas.
Second.
And you have a second. Please call the roll.
Can we have some discussion?
No, we're just voting.
Okay.
We can certainly have discussion. Do you have something that you want to say?
I don't understand. I mean, I see the value of the cul-de-sac, but if it's already just teed off, why can we not just leave it teed
Well,
off?
because it's a temporary cul-de-sac that envisions continuing on to People Street. And so with this project and the petition before us, we're obviously walking away from Douglas Drive ever continuing. And so there's no better time than the present to go ahead and move from a temporary cul-de-sac to one that meets our standards as a permanent cul-de-sac.
Fair enough.
And that's just one more thing so that they'll never cut through to People Street.
There we go.
It'll be a curb.
All righty. Okay, please call the roll.
Okay, Commissioner Lowe?
Yes.
Commissioner Harrell?
Yes.
Commissioner Cooper?
Yes.
Commissioner Clark?
Yes.
Commissioner Wise?
Yes.
Commissioner Pavlich?
Yes.
Commissioner Sandos?
Yes.
Commissioner Wild?
Yes.
And Chairman Ziones.
Yes. Thank you all. So it passed unanimously, correct?
Yes, correct,
Okay.
9-0.
Next item on the agenda will be consideration of the approval for the final plat of the village at Beechwood Meadows, Phase 1, Section 3. And thank you all for coming. Have a good evening. Appreciate you being here. Let them file out.
You're not going to stay for the whole meeting? All right.
It's nice to hear someone's having out there.
Understand why this guy can't just use this pond.
All right, Mr. Bernard, if you are ready, we are ready to listen.
Forget about this other thing he had. It seems to me he doesn't want to go to the coast.
The request before the Planning Commission this evening is to approve a final subdivision plat for Phase 1, Section 3 of the village at Beechwood Meadows subdivision. Displayed on this screen is the location of the piece of property as it is right now without any lots created within this piece of property. The final plat proposes to create 20 lots out of this subdivision. It currently adjoins Chesterfield. It has a street that was constructed a couple of years back, but the public infrastructure required on this street, such as the sidewalk, have not yet been completed. So these are some of the infrastructure that will be required, that the developer will be required to complete and post a bond for with the approval of this plat. This piece of property, as shown here, extends onto Arthur Tree Boulevard through an area which the plat being considered today designates as an alley. This is the subdivision plat. This is the alley area that I just mentioned. Sometime in the past, when this was initially proposed, it was proposed as a public street, but over the years, certain changes have been made to the initial preliminary plan or concept plan, and this has been changed to an alley. It has 2 driveways on it accessing this particular piece of property that is already developed. Usually, final subdivision plat will be something that goes through pretty quick. But a couple of issues have arisen with this particular plat, which the city engineer, Alan, will be throwing more light on it from the perspective of stormwater management issues. Because this, as I mentioned, is a section of a phase. So it's part of a bigger project. And there are stormwater management infrastructures currently that this site currently discharges into that are, however, not owned by the current property owner. You know, the developer, Mr. Gooch and the Earth Construction. I would let the city engineer throw more light on the history on how the stormwater issues have developed over the years. And with there being some resistance from the property owner who owns, which is Mr. Gary Phillips, who owns one of a pond, a detention basin down on this particular location, he is resisting the approval of this plat, basically arguing that he will not accept the water from this lot, these 20 lots being created. That is something that has legal elements, legal parameters, and I will let the city attorney handle that section of this particular presentation. This is the lot number 19 that has the stormwater detention facility that we're talking about. Alan?
Comes out of his corner.
Thank you, Mr. Cantrell.
That is a picture of the existing detention basin on Lot 19. We didn't see that earlier, but that is currently owned by Gary Phillips, the original developer of the whole project. We won't go through each of these slides, but basically you have the original phase 1 that was planned is all of these streets that I'm circling right here. The entrance road and around and out into the other older subdivision, and this street going up here. And there, as mentioned earlier, another street was planned here earlier in the concept. As the project went along, a phase 2 was added over here, and its stormwater was placed right here in this tract of land that you have before you tonight. This stormwater basin is serving this row of houses on this cul-de-sac. Lot 19, over here where this keeps popping up in my way, serves halfway through these lots. The front part's drained that way, the back part's drained this way, and it serves this pavement so far. That's all that's been built, but this basin down here on Lot 19 was built to serve this area right here. There is also a detention basin here that serves this part of that subdivision and a little bit of this right in here. So there's 3 basins involved. The one that's really the hang-up point is this one on Lot 19 right here under this thing I wish would just time out and go away. This is a different piece of software from what I was using earlier.
Well, it lets you scroll, but
Look at something behind it.
See if we can drag it over and stick it somewhere out of the way. This is the original concept. And one more slide that we'll go to, not all those that you have seen before, but this is a page out of the construction plans that shows the construction plans for that detention basin, and the one on Lot 19 is here. And one more time, Lot 19 serves halfway through these lots all of the rest of this. The basin right here serves this section that got built over here. So this was designed as a whole package to take care of what drains here, and this road could not have been built and paved without that basin being in operation. Unless you have some more questions, I'll stop right there.
So the retention basin that's lot 59 actually serves phase 2, parts of phase 2. Really doesn't serve any of this phase we're talking about here.
That's correct. Let me go to a sheet for phase 2 and show you. This is phase 2 that you saw on the photograph a while ago. That's the cul-de-sac. You see this line right here? That's the drain pipe. Water from these lots collects to the street, drains to this system here, and drains then into that detention basin on that lot. That's in place today.
This may not have a lot to do with our decision today, one way or the other, and so I'm reticent to ask it, but the detention pond at Lot 19 is already serving the road that's there and the back half of the existing row of homes. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so a person, regardless of who owns it, can't just come in and wipe out that detention pond without replacing it with another acceptable detention pond at this point. Would that be accurate to say?
That's accurate.
Okay.
So that you can't build on that particular lot without creating another retention pond for that.
I would say that you're correct, that you can't. I know you're asking me a question, but let me say, we have I guess scrolling this doesn't zoom in, so hold on just a moment. Let me go back to this and get this right here. I'll do the pluses in a minute. Well, that didn't work either.
You got a zoom button, yeah, there you go.
I don't use this anymore. It's an old piece of software, so I'll blame it, not me. Lot 19 is reserved for use as a detention basin. That was put on the original plat. It's hard to read here because this is a printout off the internet from the county's title searcher site. So that's reserving Lot 19 to be a detention basin. The original developer built that detention basin. Then he built a portion of the street that's in front of it, and then that cul-de-sac that tees off of that. And both of those pavements drain to that basin. And back to the question of that basin has to be there to detain the water shed from that pavement, at least. Now, it was built for future homes, too.
From where the drones are from now, right?
Right. So it already meets the standards that would be required for the homes on that street.
That's correct.
Okay.
The standards have changed since then. If this was a completely new development, detention basins would be designed a little bit larger and a little different. But that meets the standards at the time, which is still adequate.
Grandfather, okay.
Has this plat ever been approved?
No, the original developer did propose a plat back in 2007. It's almost identical to the one that you have tonight, but he didn't go to completion with that.
Okay.
So that was tabled. And now you see something very similar to that plat again tonight.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Herron, do you have some information for us that you might could help shed some light on the subject?
Keep in mind that my job here is to keep the city from getting caught up in what I know Ms. Sandoz is familiar with. It's called getting stuck to a tar baby.
Sorry. Can't hear you.
Sorry. My job is to keep the city from getting into what I know Ms. Sandoz is familiar with. It's called getting stuck to a tar baby. And this is a classic setup for the city to be in between the crossfire between two property owners that both happen to be developers. You're asking a good question that really is unique and we don't have clarity on and we won't get clarity on. And that is, how can one property owner who has the ownership of the pond, the basin, cut off a future developer? Keep in mind that is a large strip of property that's not developed. I would agree that Mr. Googe, the current applicant before you, has a very strong argument that he cannot be denied use of Lot 19 as a basin. But Mr. Phillips is contesting that. That is the crossfire that we need to avoid. Somebody needs to clarify that question. And is it possible for Mr. Phillips to in some way close that lot? Is he tied to it into all eternity, not Lot 19? He can close it if he can pipe it to his larger new subdivision development basin that's already in place. So it's not like Lot 19 is frozen for its current use. It may be difficult or expensive to change it, but it's not as though that establishes Mr. Googe's right to increase the water flow into that Lot 19, is what we're calling it. My suggestion to the board, for the interest of the city, which is purely what I think my job is, and I think is in large measure what your job is to protect the city. One, you can deny the request. That puts Mr. Googe in an awkward spot. We're picking winners and losers there because he is anxious to start his development, and he would have to go to Mr. Phillips with hat in hand and sort of do the best he could. So that there's an element of equity there that you need to at least think through. An alternative for Mr. Googe is to approve his plat, but require, where is that lot?
It doesn't show on that one.
Oh. I will confess that my office staff refers to me as rotary dial from time to time.
What does that mean?
Mr. Googe could, I think it's that lot right there. You could make this approval so that he could start developing and not be totally at the mercy of another developer, adjoining property owner, is to require him as a Plan B that he dedicates lot number 71 to a detention basin and to bond it at $10,000 that it would be built. If he works out the right, his entitlement, either through a declaratory judgment with the court or through negotiations with Mr. Phillips, that that lot will remain dedicated and he has property rights to flow water to it, then the city can release him from Lot 71 detention basin. But he's got to show us with clarity that he's got that property right. So that's option 2. Option for the other option, which is available from this board to recommend to either for the city manager's decision or for the city commission's decision, would be that we as the city would initiate a declaratory judgment and bear the legal cost of pursuing this clarity of property rights between these two developers. Keep in mind that the city has always got an interest in residential flooding and water problems. That same concept of service by this city in particular, not all cities would have it. It's the reason the city has a stormwater fee, and every one of these residents pays a stormwater fee. And so for that reason, the city will take these detention ponds and the headache that go with them if the developer wants to build them first and then give them to us. This one that we're talking about, the Lot 19, already needs some maintenance, okay? And so there should be some incentive for us to at least make an offer of good faith, goodwill, to not just be the problem or the bureaucracy here, but a part of the solution is, look, both you developers, we'll take all these water detention ponds up there, because there are a total of 3, one of which Mr. Googe has inherited, and really you need to address that as if you approve it. We do not want him to simply unilaterally say, I'm going to give this detention pond to a homeowners association that will be developed in the future. If a homeowner association wants to take on a detention pond, or crazy enough to, we want a minute entry in that homeowners association saying that they'll take it on. And suit us fine if they acknowledge their obligation to take care of it. But a lot of times these things just deteriorate, somebody gets flooded, and all of a sudden the city is stuck to the tar baby and is sued along with everybody else. And so we would like to avoid that.
Are we near that with Lot 19 now? I mean, you said there were some maintenance issues on Lot 19.
I don't know. We get Alan Cantrell back up here the 5th time tonight. I don't know how serious the deterioration is, but it's not unusual to find them unless deteriorating unless the city owns and controls them. They've got a program to keep them up. And so I think we would encourage both developers, keep our offer up to take these things if they want to do it. We can't make them give them to us, but there's not much financial incentive to own a detention pond.
So 2 questions. In order to assume the pond, is there a fee that has to be paid for us to take over the pond?
There is. There's an ordinance on it, and it's my understanding that if it's a grass coated bankment, it's a $2,500 fee. If it's a riprap rock type situation, it's higher. These are grass. All of them are grass. It has been known for the city to waive that fee.
Okay.
That's beyond my authority to say we would waive it. I would probably encourage it because it's the city's interest to help developers and to have property developed within
And that's
the
a
city.
decision at the city staff level then? The fee waiving or something like that, that would be?
The city manager, I think,
That's
that's surely within, it's definitely within his
Okay.
authority.
In your opinion, one of your third option was for the city to go ahead and ask for the judgment, and become involved, the declaratory judgment, and become involved and take some of that burden on. However, in your opinion, is there a forward-looking benefit from answering that question for the city that would justify us taking on that legal burden to answer the question? Is this a question that we're likely to come up with again in this unique type of a fashion in the next 20 years, that we're going to need a precedent, or is this really a unique
I think
thing
it's
where-
very unique in that we've gotten the history where the things get started and then the developer's ownership changes, and every property is always a unique layout, I think. My real preference, and what does it cost to pursue a declaratory judgment? $10,000 maybe, depends on how much caterwauling starts taking place between who you force into the courtroom. It's hard for me to imagine there'd be a lot of fight over a pond, but that is nothing but there's no cash, there's no financial incentive to owning those things. There is perhaps some incentive to moving it on the part of Mr. Phillips, but it can't be that much. I mean, there'd be a cost to it, but, I don't have the numbers to know what a buildable lot is worth in that subdivision. So maybe the numbers would work for him, I don't know, but reasonable minds could get this resolved. I think there's some undercurrent and I'd like to keep the city out of it. I really think your best move, if you want just a straight recommendation, is to approve this, subject to a detention basin on Lot 71 as a Plan B, unless Mr. Googe comes up with clarity about his rights, his property rights to use Lot 19. That way you've covered the city. It leaves, the water's not going to get away from us. And then meantime, the city maybe needs to contact Mr. Phillips about repair of his detention basin on Lot 19.
Question. If Mr. Phillips decides to build on Lot 19, that doesn't place any, or does that place any responsibility on Mr. Googe for the houses that are already using 19? It would still be Mr. Phillips' responsibility
yes.
to cover those.
Yes, that'd
And-
be in my
and
justification.
did
I think
I-
Mr. Googe has got a real good argument
Okay.
that Lot 19 is available to his use.
Did
But
I hear somebody, there's been, maybe it was Alan, he's been up here more than anybody, say that in order to protect those houses that are using Lot 19, Mr. Phillips would have to pipe their drainage to another detention pond yet to be named.
He would have to come up with a plan to move,
It
to take
seems-
care of that water, yes.
Water we're talking about is the back half of those lots that
Right.
run along that
Right.
main drain.
But Mr. Googe would not assume any responsibility for that, for those houses
He
that are
would
being
not.
served by 19.
We would not be insisting that Mr. Googe, if Mr. Phillips wants to abandon 19, we're going to have to address what he's going to do with the existing water that's flowing to it. The issue is the increase of water
Yes.
from this development, and what
Has to have
rights does
some-
Mr. Googe have to increase the flow of water into Lot 19? That's, I think.
So if we acted on one of the scenarios that you outlined, approving the plat contingent on, at least for a time, but until it was resolved, Lot 71 being dedicated to stormwater and bonding it. But then one of the other scenarios you articulated was the city potentially assuming the three
Detention.
the three existing detention ponds.
Right.
We wouldn't need to stipulate that in a motion tonight. That would just be the city is willing to take these
We're willing.
liabilities
We're
off
willing,
their
yes.
hands.
Yeah, we're willing.
Okay.
And whether we would waive the fee as a carrot to resolve this unique situation, I don't know. I don't have the authority to say that.
Could make a recommendation or submit an opinion regarding that, but that's really it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on, have the developers been in communication with one another and they're at discourse, or are they reasonable?
I don't know.
Would it possibly be in our interest just to?
Some of the staff have been dealing with both. Now, whether we got the two together.
Well, you can answer this question. As another thought, could we possibly defer this? Would it be okay to defer it and then give our recommendations to the developers on what the city may or may not be willing to do, and have them come back in 30 days and see if they can resolve this on their own?
Sure, you can do it. It does, that plays, that you're, again, on the picking the winners and losers. If that, you know, maybe you need to disregard some of that and not worry about the
The
equity.
petitioner hasn't asked for a deferral. He wants to have it signed, he
Okay.
wants to be able to go.
He's trying to go, and a
Fair enough.
deferral or a denial puts him in a vice.
I understand. Thank you.
Hey, Song, you look like you have something to tell us.
I think with respect to the information that staff has provided to both property owners or to both developers, we have had significant emails back and forth, and we've had a meeting with Mr. Gary Phillips on this particular project. He asked for the policy on dedicating these ponds to the city. I sent that policy to him. Yeah, Alan sent that policy to him. He has a copy of it. And I sent an email to him, I think end of last week, indicating, he asked that we should send a letter to him stating that the city will accept all these ponds. And I sent an email back to him saying, per the policy, all you need to do is to request Just go ahead, submit a request to the city, and the city will consider your application just as any other application we consider for development in the city, whether to take, the detention ponds or not. And there have been some discussions. When planning receives those applications, we turn them over to the Public Works Department, because they go out and they inspect the ponds and they make the decision on whether these meet standards that the city will be interested in accepting or not. From my discussion with the Director of Public Works, he is okay with the city accepting the ponds if the request is made. So he's okay with that. And I also communicated with Mr. Gooch on the option of having Lot 71 dedicated tonight, or the approval being made contingent on Lot 71 reserved as a detention basin and a bond posted for that. The city inspector who reviews the site and creates bonds, he had set that bond at $10,000. I communicated that amount to him, and he said that is something he will be okay with. He will be okay with the commission approving the plat, subject to Lot 71 being dedicated for a detention pond and him paying that bond. In that way, he can go ahead and begin construction. And then if in future, the declaratory judgment is made and he has rights to use the pond on Lot 19, then he can simply do away with that restriction on Lot 71 and build his house on it. So he is okay with that particular position. One other thing that was included in staff's recommendation, a couple of notes relating to water and sewer. There is significant water and sewer infrastructure that needs to be constructed on site. Per subdivision regulations, some of these infrastructure cannot be bonded. They need to be put in place. So I think there are about 8 of them. Is Travis here? Please, if you can throw a bit of light on that for the commission, that would be great, please, for the record. Yes.
Before Travis talks about that, Asan,
Yes, sir.
if we require Mr. Gooch to use Lot 71 for retain, is he responsible to retain the storm drainage that comes off of the back of those existing lots?
That is an interesting question. Interested in the sense that what Mr. Phillips is trying to do downstream, Mr. Gooch could do upstream. These detention ponds are connected. The detention pond on Lot 59, this one right here, is connected to the detention pond on Lot 19. And this detention pond receives water from, phase 2 of the project over here, which is owned by, that water is created by the Phillips project, If he is shut downstream, can he shut it upstream? Those are those legal issues that I think Aaron was.
That's not quite what, I'm talking about that row of lots that backs up, yes.
Okay.
In other words, right now, there is stormwater that comes off the back of those lots that eventually go to 19. But if we require Mr. Gooch to have his own separate retainage, is he required to retain that water?
No.
So how does that water get retained?
This water would go through the existing system, because right now it just flows naturally to the road, behind this, on these lots to be created, to the road, and then it gets piped from the stormwater inlets on this road. I think there's one of them here, and into Lot 19. So he will not be required in the volume that he will be creating to cater for some other person's water. He will have to calculate within the drainage area. That will be the volume that he will be retaining.
Mr. Cooper, I think the reality of what's going to happen here if this goes designated Lot 71.
People in the control room lose their mind when you don't talk in the microphone.
I think, Mr. Cooper, what's going to happen where the rubber meets the road is Mr. Gooch, if this is approved and he's dedicated Lot 71, he starts building. And that water is not going to 71 until he creates a basin. It's flowing to 19. And at some point, he and Mr. Phillips are going to have a conversation about water.
But the question still is, are they able to go and resolve the question? And ultimately, Mr. Gooch could be stuck with having 71 as a retention.
Absolutely, but he's not going to be able to start plugging, Mr. Phillips can't start plugging up pipes that run from lot 54. And
Well,
he
he
can't
can't do
start
that.
plugging up drain basins that run to 71. And actually, these developed lots on the high side are going to run to that street too, and they're going to be flowing to 19.
Yeah, they're going to 19 already, no
That's
matter
my
what.
point.
Somewhere, those guys are going to have to resolve this issue. Our position is, Mr. Gooch, we want lot 71 if you can't resolve it with your colleague.
So if Mr. Gooch resolves it, then 71 could revert back to what its normal usage was.
And so to review, what we are doing is buying Mr. Gooch some time so that he can proceed with his project. The reality of it is, he and Mr. Phillips need to have a moment of understanding, right? And that's going to occur outside of the 9 or 10 of us having a conversation here.
Exactly.
But we're not penalizing Mr. Gooch by delaying or deferring this action necessarily. Again, there's still going to be public comment.
Right,
and
we haven't even
all-
got
we
the public
haven't gotten
comment
to
yet, so
that.
don't worry, we're.
But whatever would come there, now, it's going to come to a head in a matter of weeks, not months, that at some point, if he starts wanting to build on any of these other lots, he's either got to have somewhere on 71 for it to go, or he's got.
No, it'll go to 19. It's going to 19.
Okay, and so
straight
at that
down that
point,
road.
then.
Then Mr. Phillips can decide he wants a declaratory judgment.
So in other words, we just kind of do our best to stay out of it.
Good, I do have.
They're
Just trying to boil it
At some
down.
point, these parties, other than the city, will reach what we call the crucible. And when they reach that point, it will get resolved, and hopefully it's without undue burden on us, or getting caught in their crossfire, or being asked to solve their problem for them. We didn't create this problem of a change in ownership or the foreclosure on that property by a bank. We didn't do that.
This is not a unique enough decision for the city to take on the legal burden of it, that it's going to benefit us in
I
future
don't
development
think so.
regulation.
I think
Okay.
every piece of property is going to be deemed unique.
Okay.
That's a rare one right there.
Any further questions for staff? Can we open up public?
I have,
Yes.
on that last subject, as soon as this plat if it's approved the way we've just talked, it's recorded, they can start pulling building permits. Just as stated, the water from those new rooftops will be going to lot 19. In a typical situation, this isn't typical, we will have those new rooftops going to its own detention basin before we let a permit for that first house. But we're still covered because lot 19 is designed to detain that water. It's this split of property ownership that is in the way. So what I'm going to get clear now is that when this plat is approved the way we've talked about, it's all right to start issuing building permits with it going to lot 19.
Okay, so
Because that will be, the staff will be faced with that question.
Well, that's a question. I have Mr. Herron, if you wouldn't mind approaching. Thank you.
That's a very valid question, and I think fairness to Mr. Gooch trying to find that balance.
Yeah, sorry.
Fairness to Mr. Gooch and trying to find that balance, we do need to establish, you can't develop 19 houses and then talk about that detention bond. We need to give him a number, half.
number of rooftops?
Yeah. And then if you don't have your, that gives everybody time to, if they want to go get a declaratory judgment, Mr. Gooch does. Or if Mr. Phillips says, hey, you're dumping this water on me, I'm going to go get my own declaratory judgment that you don't have the right to do it, somebody's going to resolve it.
Would it benefit the city that, because if we let one more roof go up on that upper end, then we have had a plan, by allowing the building permit, we have then basically said it's okay to increase flow of water down to pond 19. Does that increase the city's culpability in this? Are we more on the hook for it, and therefore, does it necessarily become our interest to have a declaratory judgment? Because otherwise, they could come
Valid
back and bite us
question.
on the end, on the backside.
Valid question. I mean, I don't know what your damage level would be to put water into a detention pond that's designed for it.
It is
Again,
designed
I
for it,
think
but we
Mr.
have this
Good-
contentious nature already going on.
Again, I think Mr. Good probably has got the best argument that he does have a right.
So is it your recommendation that we further stipulate, if we take action to identify Lot 71, but with the thought that perhaps he's going to work out the issues with Lot 19, that of these, what we decided is 20? 20, but that includes 71, right? So do we say up to 10? I mean, do we?
Or put a timeline on it. You can set a date. Might be even better. Not worry about number of houses and that. Just say, if you don't have something clarified for the city as to Lot 19, as to your rights to it, by, I don't know.
I mean, is 6 months sufficient, or would it need to be longer than that? How
I'd
long does
go-
it take to get a deck?
I'd go a little longer. No, you could, 6 months
Like
to
It takes 6
calendar
months to
year
get a-
18, or
9 months.
9 months?
So
Not
would it be reasonable just to not do any development on the upper lots then at all? Because they're all going to go into 19.
Well, the lower ones will too.
Yeah, okay.
Everything's gonna flow to that street, and everything in that street is flowing to 19. Including, and that's first well, I guess I did know it, that the detention basin to which none of Mr. Googe's development runs into is piped and goes to 19 as well. The city really needs to have those detention centers given to them. We can't make people give us property. We just can't do that. But reasonably, at some point, I think they will reach that conclusion too.
Right. But we're stuck in a situation tonight where we were asked to approve a plot that doesn't have a clear stormwater management system in place.
That's exactly, well, it's clouded. It's
Yeah.
clouded.
And that's a
we don't
difficult
wanna-
place.
We don't want to get caught up in a cloud.
So where's the line
25
between
years.
clear and clouded?
Partly clouded.
Like-
Well, ask that question. The other final note, don't forget, we need Mr. Googe not to designate that he is giving this number 57 detention center to a non-existent homeowners association. He can give it to a homeowners association, but the homeowners association needs to tell us that they'll take it.
Thank you very much for your input.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Herron. It's helpful. We have some more input.
I just want to speak regarding the water and sewer utilities.
Yes.
Hassan included our department's comments in the packet. I just wanted to explain the process typically is that the water and sewer utilities are constructed, and usually those progress with diligence. The construction progress does with our inspector present, and before final plat approval, we will do a walkthrough, and during that time, we just make sure everything's visibly meets our specifications and that each lot has service. In this situation, I think there's been about 12 years in between the time it was constructed and final plat, so it's a little unique of a situation. So, and we've listed, we had eight issues here. The first and foremost being water quality. Again, it's been out there dormant. These water lines have been out there for 12 years. No one's been using them. No one's been flushing them. So that's a huge concern for us. So we would require that the lines be disinfected and subject to bacteriological testing in accordance with our standards and TDEC guidelines. And I can go through this list. Their as-built that they submitted indicated that Lot 61 did not have water service to it. It also indicated that, actually 61 and 62 did not have water meters to them. Lot 61 did not have a sewer lateral. Multiple water meters, setters, boxes, and laterals were buried, broken, or have inadequate cover. Multiple water valve boxes are not adjusted to finish grade or missing lids. 2-inch blow-off is depicted on their as-built, but it's not visible. And if you guys have driven by there, you'll notice the hydrant's actually backwards. So there are some deficiencies. In addition to that, there needed to be an additional easement added to Lot 59 that would encompass the public sewer line that is within that lot. So there are some deficiencies that need to be addressed, and per the subdivision regulations, my understanding is water sewer utilities cannot be bonded. That's all I have, unless y'all have any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions from Commission? No. Thank you. Okay, it's been a lengthy discussion for us to wrap our heads around what we're dealing with tonight. We'll go ahead and open up public comment, though, for or against this plat approval. Anybody wishing to speak for or against, please step forward.
My name is Susan Donner. I reside with my husband at 204 Alta Tree. That is Lot 20 on the plat. I have a handout for the commission consisting of some photographs of the actual property taken by Lester Latney for us.
Sure, we may have that.
In the photographs, our house is shown on page 2 at the left, second row. We've lived in this property for 10 years, and we've tried diligently to maintain the concrete against mold and mildew with respect to the property, the concrete leading to nowhere. On page 3 at the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see the exit of this concrete driveway, and it hits the island. And my neighbors and I are worried about the safety issue presented here, that a mistake is not made, and the flow of traffic, if this were to be made a throughway, would be a problem. We were told when we first arrived that the ideal goal would be a bike path with pylons driven at the end, so that the neighbors who usually go to the cul-de-sac on what would be the New Meadows Road and turn around, then they could walk through the neighborhood and circle around. Our driveway is next to the blue so-called alleyway, and we exit and we turn to the right and we go around the island to the left to exit the neighborhood. And we feel that adding an ingress and egress at the island would be a problem, because you have traffic entering the neighborhood and also exiting. So we were hoping that the commission would consider either making this a bike path, or at the very max, just making it one direction into the new neighborhood. The demographics of our neighborhood are changing, and we recently acquired a new neighbor who has small children, and he's here, and he's going to address you tonight. On page 4, you see the, quote, alleyway, unquote, on the left-hand side in the second row, in basically its entirety, and it is sloped, and anyone entering the neighborhood and then entering Phase 1, Section 3 from that, quote, alleyway would be going down a hill, and there would be visibility problems if anyone was coming the other way. My husband and I just do not understand why the alleyway is narrow at one point and then widening at the other point. The rectangle here is access to underground power station, and further up is an entrance to our lower garage. We don't own a boat or anything like that, and I assume that was what it was originally meant for. Oh, thank you. The concrete, as it stands now, has received very little automobile traffic, just for the most part maintenance men, satellite dish installation, that kind of thing. And it's already deteriorating because of the Tennessee climate and the mold problem. And we've tried various chemicals, and we've endured the cost ourselves to try to keep it looking nice. We just hope the commission would consider what possible debacle could happen as a result of this piece of concrete being made a thoroughfare.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And just so you know, it's in even our previous meeting before this, Mr. Cantrell was able to help fill us in on the history of how that's changed and the thought of it being a pedestrian path and what was going on. So thank you for giving us your input. And if the petitioner's here, I'd like to have them come up forward and speak to the alleyway and what their thoughts or plans are for it. Is there anybody here that can speak to that for us?
My name's Terry Orth, 3312 Wayfield Drive, Johnson City, Tennessee. I'm partners with Mr. Gooch.
Thank you. We had heard that in the past that would have, kind of been planned to be a pedestrian path and maybe put some bollards there to prevent vehicular traffic or something.
Yeah, and I apologize for not
What
communicating.
would y'all like to do there, though?
Well, and I apologize for not communicating more with her. The city has mandated us, Mr. Cantrell, it was just going to be a bike path, a walking path. They were going to make us put up posts. There's going to be no traffic on that path. Hassan had us put that in the plat.
So that's not a concern for
No,
you
sir.
and what you want to do?
No, sir. No,
Okay.
sir. In fact, the city, Hassan and Mr. Cantrell and Mr. Penzola, they mandated what we had to do to complete that for pedestrian and bike traffic only. So there'll never
Okay.
be, we're actually going to have to keep traffic.
Thank you. Would you like to speak further regarding the approval?
Yes,
or-
sir. I appreciate Mr. Herron. I appreciate Hassan and everybody trying to make this equitable and fair. I'm dumbfounded by the situation. We own this pond here, which serves all these homes up here, and I can't speak to the laws of the state of Tennessee, but once you build a pond, and I've built a lot of them in my career, you can't stop the water from going to that pond. I mean, we're here, we're sort of the lightning rod for this because we want to develop this property, but there's a lot of other folks that are represented here who use that pond every day. All these homes here, all these homes up in this phase 2 go to my pond here. Before we purchased the property from
I think you're getting ready to make an argument that probably ultimately is going to be made to somebody in a black robe. and probably not us. I mean, I think, I'm sympathetic to what you're saying.
No,
but,
hey, I don't.
you know,
I disagree, Mr. Wise. I mean, there's thousands of ponds all over the state of Tennessee. I don't know what the precedent of the law says,
But what
it's
I'm
pretty
saying is
clear-cut.
whether we approve this plat or not, we're not dealing with whether you can or can't put water into Mr. Phillips' lot number 19. I may be profoundly sympathetic to your position, but my opinion on it doesn't really matter. Because
Well,
we're-
it does to a certain extent with us wanting to start construction. I mean, this
Right, and so that's, but the point is, the two choices we have about stormwater, while there's a contentious issue with Mr. Phillips, is to either delay all action on your request, which I don't think you would like, or the other is to put a caveat in there about lot 71 that buys you some time to work out those issues.
We're tickled to death with that. We've
Okay.
already expressed that to the staff, and we appreciate that. I guess my whole question is I've got 6 or 8 of these ponds. So I guess, can I come to you guys or all the homeowners that my ponds serve all over Johnson City, and all of a sudden say I'm going to dam those ponds up and not let you use them anymore? I mean,
Yeah.
where's the common sense here? I must be missing something.
Well, you can't come to us.
You can't come to us.
Right.
is the question.
We're not smart enough, Mr. Worth, to make those kinds of,
I'm not either. And
and a lot of judges aren't either, but.
And not to not listen to your public comment, because it's valuable, but I think when it comes down to the management of the storm wall and the legality of it, what Commissioner Wise is saying, maybe that's probably not the question we're going to answer tonight. But but thank you for your help with the alleyway, and we appreciate you being here to support the project. Is there anyone else here wishing to speak for or against? Yes, sir, whoever hops up first, be glad to have you come up. Yes, I'm sorry, just 1 second.
I'd just like to make the point. I think I heard him say that they were okay with using Lot 71 as a catch basin.
Tickled
Backup.
with it.
Right, I mean, I think as
To get
a
started.
means of getting this moved
Yeah, as a
along.
backup
Right,
plan.
exactly.
Because if you had to, you could divert it or something, but that's right, got it.
So that's an interesting point that speaks very well for letting them go ahead and start.
Absolutely. Yes, sir. Give us your,
Benny McDonald. I live at 200 Alta-Tree Boulevard, Plat 37. It's labeled incorrectly here on this slide. It says 36, but it's actually 37 on the
right, we have it
paperwork.
correct on this one here. So we've got you right across the street from your neighbor who just spoke a few moments ago, I guess.
Right,
Or across the alleyway, because it's not a street.
The alleyway.
That's
The pedestrian
correct,
way.
right. It's a driveway. And when I just purchased a home, my wife and I, in September, and we were told that this was a shared driveway between mine and Susan's home. And earlier, we just found out that, it's supposed to be just a bike path or a pedestrian path. That's a major relief to me, because I thought that coming here tonight, that this was supposed to be turned into a street for traffic. And right here, this is 7 feet, 7 inches away from my son's bedroom, where he lays his head.
But we now know that what you're concerned about isn't what's happening.
Right. So, it seems like there's a lot of uncertainty here and a lot of unanswered questions between what's going to be allowed to transpire between the gentlemen that have the rights for the ponds, the detention ponds and the water. Aside from that, this community and these homes were built starting 14 years ago, if I'm not wrong. It's 14 years. My home that I purchased was built in 2005. What I would like to see is that the homes are aesthetically accompany what is already there. But it's hard to do that when you think of, 14 years has gone by, so things are going to change, designs are going to change, people are going to change in what they think is, it's a different builder altogether, and their frame of mind of what they want to see with the homes that they build might be vastly different than what's already there. So you're going to change the style of the community, of the homes. I think if they are going to build these houses here, that they should be aesthetically the same type of designs, even if it's with a different builder.
I do appreciate that input. Unfortunately, I don't think that's the question, or we don't have that legal authority to dictate that with what we're discussing tonight. But here you're on the alleyway, understand that, and hopefully we've gotten an answer for that for you tonight, so.
Somewhat, but
Thank you. Is there anything
still,
else?
it's a 12-year gap between the completion of this.
Wasn't it, we didn't hear you. It's
Right.
what, the property owners have rights too.
And the truth is, even if that were happening in a community where the developer didn't change, and I'll use Waterbrook as an example, from the beginning of Waterbrook to the ending of Waterbrook, the brick and many of the material options that were used on the very first houses weren't even available as the final houses were built in the last year. We can't really dictate to the new developer how the development, we can't prescribe the paint colors and the roof pitches, but my suspicion is developers have a keen sense of what will sell, and something that's grossly out of place probably won't sell. And so we can't help with that concern, but I think we can help with the question about the alleyway, and we can help with the question. So there's perhaps not as much ambiguity as it may sound in where this eventually ends up. There may be some ambiguity for the parties that are directly involved, but they're not things that are going to necessarily have consequence for you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. And that's
I'm James Krell. I live at 114 Alta Tree Drive. I've been there about 3 or 4 years. Our subdivision has a walkway, and I walked those walkways a number of times. I always thought this was a driveway. It's not a road. It's built, and it looks like a driveway, and it's like going to another house, but there's no house there it goes to. Has no sidewalks, has no curb to turn water or nothing. Recently, there was about a month or so ago, there was a stolen car at high speed come through our neighborhood, followed by police, and they turned down that road, that driveway, which I'll call an alley, and run into that subdivision that you're talking about building, and crashed into a hole. That cul-de-sac, I'm no engineer, but if you drive up there and drive around that cul-de-sac, there's a deep hole there that goes into a cave. I grew up in that neighborhood. Mr. Harrell, parents lived in that neighborhood, and there's caves in there that I personally have been in that go as far as 100 feet in height, and then there's places it goes that you can just crawl through. On this property, not only in that road, that cul-de-sac, there's other holes in there. This property already has drainage problems. I don't understand about all this stuff y'all were talking about tonight, what's legal and what's not, but you can look there that this property has a drainage problem, that it's a low area, and all the water's coming there, and it's going into these caves, and these caves are opened up, and whoever builds on this has got a problem. Thank you.
So, sir, what is it you think should happen?
Somebody's got a mess, and
We've already established
I'm
that.
no engineer, but you can just drive there and by there and see that all this stuff was put in there 12 years ago is got to be replaced. And whatever the city has done to put power lines in there or whatever, all this stuff is going to have to me, it looks like it's going to have to be redone. I just don't understand anybody wanting to, unless they just want to start from scratch. But it just, and the other thing that driveway, I call it a driveway, it needs something there to stop cars from going into it. If you're going to call it an alleyway or whatever.
Thank you very much. I think that's exactly what's in the plan. As a matter of fact, we're going to have bollards put up so you couldn't actually drive a car through there.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else here wishing to speak for? Yes, sir.
Two more.
Three.
Let's go two. Good.
Yep, 3.
Hello, my name is Jason Johnston, 1500 Kings Road, Johnson City. And I'm for the development, don't have a problem with the development other than the liability that we may potentially incur. I have an interest in the property down below it. And I do think that Mr. Phillips has reached out to Mr. Gage and Mr. Orth with a letter to say, hey, if you guys want to talk, we're open to talking. So, that door is not closed, and it's been mentioned several times tonight about damming up the detention basins and all of that stuff. That's the first I've ever heard of any talk like that, so I'm not aware of anybody that has those intentions. So, the big thing is TDEC, we have also met with, and they require stormwater protection plan in place before construction can begin. Right now, that is all under Gary Phillips's name for the initial development and the land that Mr. Orth and Mr. Googe bought. So, big concern that we have is even downstream, if he goes in there and starts developing all of a sudden, and we got a detention pond that already has some issues, we don't want to be liable for all his water. He bought a piece of land. That piece of land did have a detention pond on the back of it that's used for phase 2. He bought it. It's his. You know what you're buying. So, and that's okay with us. But the big thing that we don't want to have is liability for his water. You made a wonderful comment on the previous development about the state and the obligation to not push water on your neighbors. I think that's kind of where we're at. We don't mind to, and he had talked about the backs of these houses, and I'm stormwater certified level 1. I am sure that we could come up with a calculation to account for the water from the back of these houses that could go down into a regional detention pond or a potential regional detention pond that's on the land that we do own. So,
But what you're talking about, though, is the point of contention over what's lot number 19, correct?
Correct.
And so what we're talking about is if we adhere to the recommendation of staff, we're going to carve out lot 71 to become a detention pond within this street. And that question doesn't become an issue.
We're perfectly fine with that.
Right,
Not an issue at all.
but now I think it's safe to say there's probably going to be more conversation about that. It just isn't going to be here.
Exactly.
Okay.
So.
And I just wanted to express that
Okay.
we're not unwilling to work with the parties involved. And I like Terry, I've worked with Terry for years, and I know Ron, and I have no problem with those guys. Don't want to have a problem with those guys. So, we're open for discussion, and I just want to make that known to you and you as well.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we, Alan, Mr. Cantrell, we'll have you come up next, sir.
This gentleman right here made a comment about what he calls the driveway, and we have talked about.
I had a question about that, too. Is that easement given, or is that still on private property there? Is there an alleyway easement?
That driveway is on Mr. Googe's property.
It's on Mr. Googe's
It belongs to Mr. Googe right now.
Okay.
Those pieces of the driveway coming out from the lady's house belongs to Mr. Googe.
And that's not designated any public right-of-way at all at this
Not
point?
yet.
That is
Now, when
Mr.
this
Googe's
plat is
private property?
approved, that will be designated as an alley right-of-way. All right, but it doesn't have to service traffic. It can service pedestrians. Now, to keep the traffic out of there, we could use bollards. But I have an issue. If we put a bollard up at the street, then these two driveway stubs are cut off.
Right.
And when we were in workshop, what I envisioned is bollards right at this, below
At
the second driveway.
Right.
So they can
back of the
still get
house.
into those two driveways.
Right.
The
Which
gentleman
is
says we
very
need to
kind.
block it off at the street to keep the stolen car from coming down in there. We are not proposing that, and I want
Put
him
the
to
bollard down at
understand
the end of the
that.
driveway.
I want him to understand that those two driveways to this lady's house will still be accessible to that piece
Nothing
of
will
the
change
path.
about the way they get in and out of their driveway.
Did this
We're
house
gonna
meet the
have-
setback rules for Mr. Googe's property? I'm just kind of curious. It seems to be right on the line.
Really? Yeah, it is.
There's a possibility, the reason that widens out, and I don't know about the setback, but that was originally a 50-foot right-of-way through there for a street, and then it gets kind of brought down. There could have been some stuff built in there that required that line not to move. Or that lot was sold when that was the line for a road, and it's never been changed to something narrower.
It's on top of utility station, or what did he say?
That could have been
One
it
of
too,
those
there's
corners.
underground
Does
utilities.
Mr. Good, is he responsible, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Right now, he owns that piece of
But he
concrete.
doesn't have to make any capital
The
improvements.
previous owner of the concrete and now the new owner of that concrete is responsible for the maintenance of it until it becomes dedicated to the city as a pathway.
Thank you.
Can I ask you a question, though? So you're going to allow for pedestrians and bike traffic on that, but still allow for private vehicles to that house? Is that
I
what you're
don't see any
proposing?
choice, now that these have been put there.
Okay.
I don't know that we can cut that off. We can put bollards right here and right here,
So
and not
who-
allow traffic to go here.
But then who would assume the liability if a child is coming down that on a bicycle and is hit by a car from the homeowner accessing one of those driveways?
This homeowner would be responsible for that accident. Unless they,
Whoever driving the car.
But
you would have to show there's some negligence on the city's part of maintenance or something, but if we're not negligent, it's not our fault. It's this person that backs over that.
I guess
I think we
I'm
could layer
concerned.
so many variables into this, it would be a complex ACT question that no one ever gets right.
And I'll sit down at this. The reason I want to stand up and say this is I didn't want people to expect that there would be a bollard go up right there.
Right. Thank you, Alan. Let's go ahead and make sure we finish up public comment. Yes, sir.
My name's Jeff Idens. I'm 305 Alta Tree Boulevard. I'd like to mention that I'm glad to see somebody finally developing the property. Particularly in our neighborhood, we're interested in how that is going to affect our property values. So we're interested in what the plans are. But it points out some of the questions that have come up. It appears to me that there hasn't been a whole lot of communication between the new developers and the neighborhood on what the plans are, so that the neighborhood knows what's going on. And there's some confusion, as you can see, about this right away. So I would urge that somehow we need to clear up those misconceptions. I understand, having tried to organize a homeowners association for our current development, that working to get everybody on the same page is difficult. And I think you see some of that going on here with the retention ponds, but I'm in favor of working that out as soon as practical and getting new houses built there. That will increase our property value.
Thank you.
Although we can't, I guess in this meeting, predict the quality of the house that's being built, we're hoping that the developer builds a house that is commensurate with the quality of the current houses in the neighborhood. Okay?
Thank you, sir. Anybody else wishing to speak for or against? Yes, sir. We got two more. Okay. Please, if it's something that we've already said, kind of said dittos. If not,
Travis Googe, 105 Shadden Springs.
Hey, Travis.
I just want to let you guys know that we do have coverage from TDEC on the property. So the stormwater concerns, we got that taken care of today. So we are covered for that property. And just wanted to let you guys know that.
Thank you, Mr. Googe. We appreciate you. Thought I saw one more hand go up for public comment. Yes, sir.
I'm Hugh Webb, 203 Chesterfield. And I have basically two questions. I don't understand what an additional retention pond will do to keep the water out of Lot 17. There may be a way of going around it, but I don't see that. It seems to me that the water, regardless of an intermittent retention, is going to go to that corner one down there, that 17. My second question is, I do not understand how, in good faith, anyone can say you can't use my retention pond when that's the purpose for it being there in the first place. So what's missing in my understanding is what would anyone have to gain, or what is the intended profit of objecting to the use of that pond?
So it's safe to say you're incredulous about the concern here. I think we've got that down, and we're gonna, again, we're not here to be the legal body to decide that, and that's an issue, but we don't want to hold up development where we don't need to. We want to work out a plan that can help with the developer. I think ultimately this question is going to come to the crucible and will be decided, probably just not here tonight.
It'll be a black robe decision.
Exactly.
Okay,
Thank you very much. Is there any further questions or comment tonight for the public comment? No. And seeing none, I'll go ahead and close the public comment section. I will ask for discussion and/or motions amongst the planning commission members.
I have a question. I don't mean to supersede, and perhaps this might be a question for Ms. Donner, who spoke and said that you do not use the lower driveway because you do not have a boat or anything. Is that upper driveway that is accessed from this alleyway in use by you for vehicular traffic?
No, not as an entrance. We use the second driveway always. I'm the only person.
So would there, so I don't know if I'm,
That's the only exit we use also.
so I don't know if I'm allowed to ask, would putting a bollard at the street at Alta Vista, would that be objectionable to use?
Probably because that would kind of make it so I would never transfer property. My husband and I are older, and it might be more than we can handle. So we may like to transfer the property.
Well, you don't own the property.
But you don't own that
You can't
driveway.
transfer that driveway.
I'm talking about lot 20, where we live, our house.
Right.
Correct.
Maybe transferring that, if that might be an impediment for us to sell it, since you cannot access the lower driveway where you would put a boat, etc.
Right. You're not, just because you're not using it doesn't mean that the next owner wouldn't want to use it. Exactly.
Yeah, you could still access, it appears as if, yeah, you could still access it. Yes, you could technically, if she repaved
Well,
what
I
she
mean,
did
which I
own.
guess a person who has stolen a car could just enter her driveway and then drive all the way down that alley too.
My only point of contention is that if that is going to become a pedestrian or a bike lane, I would prefer to see that closed off entirely to vehicular traffic.
So we have, thank you very much. Appreciate it. So I'm looking for motions, all right?
No, more discussion.
Sorry about this.
Good, please. I'm looking for
In the
ultimately a motion, but I'll take
We'll
discussion.
get there. Worst case, if we approve using 71 as retention, and the two parties are not able to come to some resolution,
Then they'll have to divert the water to their pond in 71.
all the water. Okay.
But that's why it's an
So Mr.
insurance policy
Developer
to have it.
understands that.
Put
He
some
does.
sort of dike in the pipe to divert half the water.
So it may be
Oh, wait a minute,
helpful.
wait a minute.
Well, no, I have a question. But, you go ahead. No, seriously. There are a bunch of contingencies that have been tossed around, one being the
Lot
71 being dedicated to stormwater. There's been the discussion of the alleyway and restricting it to pedestrian traffic, which Mr. Worth indicated was, agreeable. There's also a question about the basin that's on the property that's owned by Gouge, what was it, lot 59? And then Travis had some questions that were basically outlined under the water and sewer comments. And so at some point, if we were to make a motion to approve the plat, there are a handful of these things that we need to get into the record to be clear on where those caveats are. And this may be a staff question.
Go ahead. I mean,
Can we basically, there's 7 of them in the water utility section.
8.
8.
8, yeah, well, no, but one of them in the 8th was, I thought Travis said there were only 7 that really survived as open concerns.
There's 7 that are related to items in the field that need to be addressed. Item number 8 is specifically.
Oh, that's the easement, okay.
Yeah.
So really, we could make a motion to approve the plat, subject to those 8 provisions, subject to the number 71 lot being dedicated to stormwater and the alley, and those both being bonded. And then
Lot 59, how it's
the lot
handled.
50, yeah, how we describe what happens with lot 59 with respect to this homeowners association that doesn't exist. Am I missing anything?
What was the deal with the existing sewer? Is that the easement?
The easement on to 59.
Okay, I got it.
So we need to have it contingent upon the water and sewer requirements as enumerated being met. Lot 71 being used as a detention pond. Lot 59 being managed by the developer or handed over, and city given written evidence of it being handed over to a functioning homeowners association that accepts responsibility, or given to the city. And that's in the alleyway being restricted to pedestrian traffic.
And the bond.
And the bond
on
on
the
the
alleyway.
Bond
alleyway
on the
and
alleyway
lot 71.
and lot 71.
The bond amount that we have
10,000?
includes elements beyond just the alleyway. For example, the sidewalk. This sidewalk has not been completed. It needs to be completed. So the engineering department, they had made a punch list on that, and the total amount came up to $61,263.40.
That's
So-
separate from the retention pond bond.
That's separate from the retention pond bond, yes. And they already got a bond for that. He just handed that $61,000 bond to me. And interestingly, just while we're talking about the bonding of the alley, that was actually included in this $61,263.40.
So that's bonded already.
That is, yes, that is included in this amount.
And did we not mention in the workshop to extend that to the cul-de-sac, the alley to the cul-de-sac?
That is part of what this bond will cover.
Okay, it's
Yeah.
in there.
If they go ahead and they put that pedestrian, here it says a multi-purpose trail, you can walk or bike on it. If they do that extension, then they can request that the city should reduce the bond amount, and we'll give them back how much was allocated for that.
I think we've all come to some discussion and clarity and unity on all those constrictions, except for having the bollard at the street versus at the back of the property, which is recommended by staff, or just having it at the back of the property. At this, on the
Should we-
restricting pedestrian
I also had another question.
Okay, super.
Just in regards to, I know we put lot 71 as a bond, or we're looking at that. Do we need to add the additional time frame as Mr. Herron requested, or does that need to be a caveat to that? Or do we not need
Whole
that?
issue of the negotiation.
So we need to add the caveat of the time frame of 9
9
Well,
months?
do we? That's why I asked the question.
I heard your question, but I've heard a lot more. Tell me your question one more time.
It's getting late.
Yeah.
Question is, what if they are not able to resolve? Now, I think, Eric, what happens in your scenario, Eric, if after 9 months, they're not able to resolve it?
Good question.
I heard your question and the proposed response to it, but I think the water off that original houses that exist keep flowing to 19. In fact, it's going to intermingle with whatever gets developed on the high side of that road. It's all going to flow to that road and be piped to 19. They're not going to be able to plug that line. That's what's going to force them to resolve it. It's, you can say, okay, you're just going to have to turn all his water into lot 71.
So maybe maybe my question to you is, do we really care about the 9 months or whether they resolve it or not?
It just gives a bargaining chip.
I think it would probably be beneficial to everybody to have a date certain where we can all move past it, including the city, and know where we are.
Which could be continued by mutual agreement if they'd almost reached.
By approval of this board, if you make it.
Well, they come back before us. That would be
I think
good.
they can get it resolved. I'm telling you, fussing over a catch basin is like fussing over who gets to pick up the garbage or something. It's just.
I've seen some fistfights over garbage, so.
Ask Rand Paul about.
Well, one reason why we wouldn't want to not give a definite end date is, in the event that it is fully developed, houses go up, you've got all these additional hard surfaces, then you've got flooding, and then if there is runover, if the catch basin on Lot 19 is not sufficient to hold that additional flow, then we have opened up the city to additional litigation or potential litigation at that point. If we put an end date on it, we're not going to leave this open for a 5-year debate over who's going to get that.
You're right, but staff has already attested to the fact that the basin
designed.
is in
19 is
fact
sufficient.
sized for this property.
Well, it is if there are no maintenance issues with it, if it's not cloud or debris with anything, which in the photograph, it doesn't look like that. Right now, it is. But what about in the event of a 500-year rainfall, 500-year flood? There are always things that you can't see that
So-
we don't want to continue to be tied to.
The recommendation for council then was to go ahead and have a 9-month trigger for it to either be a functional 71 detention pond or not. Is that correct?
I think so.
Just a
Okay, it looks like the developer is shaking his head up and down that he's okay with that.
If they need to come in here and get an extension, but it's, it puts a line in the sand for them to try to meet.
Yes, sir.
And I think they will. It just, these detention basins are.
Very good.
All right, we have a requirement in the subdivision rec that 1 year, so the planning commission approved this today with the bond, and within 1 year, all the improvements have not been put in place, then the developer has to renew that bond.
So
It
there's
has to
already
come
a-
back to the plan, before the planning commission.
There's already a line in the
So
sand
there
at
is a
1 year.
1 year time frame. Could we just use that 1 year time frame?
That sounds like that would be simplest. Okay. There were other questions?
That was mine the time.
Okay.
Hope somebody did that.
All right, so
So how are you doing on the notes?
Doing well.
this may have the most conditions of anything we've ever done. We do
Would you
need
like
have
me to
them-
read the conditions back?
Yes, why don't you do that?
Okay. Water sewer regulations are met. Lot 71 retention becomes a retention pond with a bond. 1 year time frame to resolve and make it a functional retention pond at Lot 71. Lot 59 must be managed or handed over to the homeowners association or city in that 1 year time frame. Is that
It doesn't have
correct?
to be in a year, it just is either the
A part of it,
developer
okay.
will manage it, or it will eventually be handed
don't
over
want
to
to
a
go to
functioning
homeowner
homeowner.
association.
association.
Yeah, it has to be
accepted.
accepted by
Ah,
a
okay.
functioning homeowners association.
Or
Okay.
accepted by the city. One of
Because
the
it'll be cheaper to give it to the
Okay.
city.
And the alleyway will be restricted to pedestrian and bike traffic only.
Yes.
Okay.
And
And the pending the negotiations.
Yes.
I
The
think that was,
negotiations.
Or the
I think that was everything.
Resolving 19.
yes, resolving 19 that goes with the subdivision regulations, correct?
So the only point that didn't have, what I'm hearing is unanimous discussion here is where the bollards would go on the alley, on the street or at the back of the lot, which would preserve the functioning driveway.
Is that a
for-
decision this body needs to make in accepting the plat?
Yeah, it's not their
I
property.
think Mr. Cantrell Ernie's keep.
He's gone.
Yeah, all right. No.
Well, he was recommending the bollards at the back of the
Well, but
property.
At some point, he'll approve it one way or the other.
I heard the gentleman, but I'm not inclined to cut off two driveways that have been in use for a number of years, that have established kind of a right to use that other gentleman's land, because they've been traveling on it for a certain amount of time. And we could get in another lawsuit to take them down. So the safest thing for us is to put them below the last driveway, not necessarily on the property line, but just below the last driveway where they can get in and out of it without any trouble.
Thank you, Mr. Cantrell. And I'm not, we're ready for that motion, including all of that. And
I make a motion that with those contingencies.
Something out on 19 that we don't have to do 71, is that correct?
That's
Right.
Exactly.
That's correct,
And
yes.
you would just come back to the staff to have that.
I make a motion, we approve that.
What I
She
said.
just said.
Commissioner Liu was your second.
You get,
Commissioner
yeah,
Harrell.
you get
was
bonus
your-
points if you can
your
recite it.
Yeah. All right, so barring any further discussion, will please call the roll.
Okay.
Do we have a second?
Yes, we
Yes,
do.
we did. Commissioner Lowe?
Yes.
Commissioner Harrell?
Yes.
Commissioner Cooper?
Yes.
Commissioner Clark?
Yes.
Commissioner Wise?
Yes.
Commissioner Pavlich?
Yes.
Commissioner Sandos?
Yes.
Commissioner Wild?
Yes.
And Chairman Zions?
Yes. We have a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
Adjourn.